Hello everybody, welcome my acrylic painting demonstration, and today I will be working on the composition taken last summer, late spring, early summer. So I've got loads of greens in front of me, loads of grasses, branches of some of the brambles and some of the trees, green fields, some trees far at the back. I'm interested to share how that variety of greens can be used within acrylic painting. I also want to focus on some mark making and layering of different colors. How do we get started on such a complex image? I have decided to work on a gray background, so that I can bring some of the bolder greens, yellowish greens, some gorgeous whites, and work through using the gray background as my base, as tonal support for the build-up of the colors. I have a range of brushes with me, and I'm going to start with sketching using my round synthetic brush, and later on I'll be using a flat brush and some filbert brushes, different widths. Now on my palette I have some white, cadmium yellow, ochre, a little bit of crimson, violet, ultramarine, and some emerald green. So I will start with getting a color for my sketching, and I'm gonna go for a mixture of emerald green and violet, and I'll be using water to create nice and liquidy consistency of the paint, so that I can work with it on my surface. Just going to test it. Yes, I can see it really well. So let's plan my overall composition. Now, first of all, I have quite a higher raised horizon. It's not perfectly straight, but almost a third of the painting takes the sky. So I might just give it a gentle descent here. I have a group of trees at the back, and I also have maybe slightly low actually, and I also have some branches which are framing the whole composition from left and right. All right, let's just move this line. So just a bit of water will remove that. Okay. Maybe that slant will start going slightly higher on the left, and coming back. So let's plan roughly how much space those branches will be taking, how much space and volume they will start taking here. So I might just give them a rough width before I expand any further. And now I also have a darker shaped tree at the back on the left, and then a light, very detailed branch with beautiful leaves, which overlaps, kind of crosses almost my branch at the back. Perhaps that could go a tiny bit more higher. So then some of the leaves here will come through. There will be more sky than actually leaves, but that will be quite an exciting contrast of colors. Okay, perhaps might be another branch coming in. Again, it's totally wrong contrast because those are going to be much lighter images, leaves. Right, I also can see part of the fence here, part of the structure. Might need to bring it a little bit more towards center, more a little bit more on right. And how high it's need to go in over the horizon, maybe down a bit lower. So those are components to consider while planning the layout, moving things within the image. I can see a big shadow, perhaps from another fence structure, perhaps from just the other different shadows. Maybe another bush here. Okay. And let's have a look at the trees at the back. I love this particular round shaped tree. Quite a nice character of a tree. Then it's a group of two and another two smaller trees. Okay, that gives me an opportunity to kind of decide if I need to have a little bit more sky space. I think I might need to drop it all slightly lower. So then the darkness of the branch above will have full strength. So I'm moving it from my initial thoughts, repositioning it gently, and then this branch could be slightly darker altogether, and actually has the space to create a shadow over, because that's quite a key component. Okay. Something here. And at the foreground, I have a group of lovely flowers, which come right at the center, right, and the right part of my composition. So I might just plan them as more bigger shapes and find them a bit tiny bit taller here. So then I have almost like an oval here for the space, how that everything develops. And because the rest will be supporting that space, I can then look into undergrowth in front of the field, and build up some shadows behind the flowers, behind parsley flowers. And also create a nice dynamic for the stems and all the grasses. So far, just a cluster of variety of shapes here. Flowers looking at different angles. And I love some of them, quite elongated grasses, individual grasses, which I might relocate some of them gently, some of them just building up above the horizon. This might compete with my fence post, so I might need to be much more delicate with my brush strokes. Maybe my fence post will need to be more significant. Again, that's something to consider and evaluate. And then there are loads of wonderful grasses coming at the front. So if I'll find just rough directions for them, planning some of my strokes, as this oval is developing kind of upwards, some of these grasses will need to go and slowly raise up to that kind of support, stretching out, reaching out, balancing, coming across. So it's easier to do it now and make mistakes or make adjustments or kind of check those directions rather than when I've spent a lot of time and effort into developing my tones, my colors, working things out, and then making those decisions and perhaps changing them. That's much more difficult to overcome. Okay, so this one could come here as well. Okay, so look a little bit crude in shapes, but that's all come much more detailed later on. Still debating with the height of the sky. I think that's very good. Okay, so might stop on my drawing here. And just a little bit support this drawing. I'll use some larger strokes of the similar color. Same diluted violet and emerald green. And work into some of the shadows at the back. It also tests my, gives me an opportunity to test my strokes. Extra darkness for the background. Now I know where the flowers are going to be. So it's almost like a very basic tonal decision making. A bit more extra darkness on foreground. A bit more water. I want to keep the layer transparent and light. I can build up on some of these darknesses quite quickly. Okay. Now, because I already have my gray background, that gives me a medium tone in my painting. I already identified very basically some of my darks. Now I can focus on some highlights. So I'd like to work within the sky. So let's have some white. Again, I'm using my flat synthetic brush. And I'm going to add a small dab of violet and ultramarine to part of my sky to make it a little more warmer blue. Now that's quite a light tone. Also need to have a darker tone for the sky. So ultramarine and white will be a good one to start. Let's just test it against the white palette. It looks a very dark, well, darkish tone, but I need to have it quite dark later on. So maybe a tiny bit more ultramarine blue. And I can see some lower cloud on the sky, which gives me a nice shadow. So let's just block some of the basic spaces. Now the tree branches above shouldn't be stopping me to kind of to work further into the sky, working a little bit more higher. Okay, maybe a little bit more round. I want to see the whole shape of the sky together. Just making final decisions on my tree here. So if it's a very slender branch with very small leaves, I'll paint over it. It's quite a dark blue. And this blue will maybe not as dark as that. I wanted to follow the diagonal of that cloud which develops. Okay. Tiny bit more violet on my brush with blue. I can see some of it going between my shapes of the trees. Finding little gaps. Another color I'd like to use is a dab of ochre and violet. It's quite a lot of white and a small amount of blue, ultramarine blue, so it becomes much more gray in tone. Same time, it's a little bit, I've got a little bit of warmth within that mixture, and if I use slightly lighter version of it, can make it slightly warmer using ochre or making it slightly violetty. So that will be some of my subtones for the clouds. I'll come back to the shape of these trees. So far, I'm happy with one of the trees here. Let's just develop some of the other shapes. Now, I could have painted just the sky on its own, but I also wanted to plan some of my exciting strokes. That's why I've semi-planned them, and now I'm going to have combination of when these branches will be slightly lost and when the sky will come above them, and when the branches will be a little bit more found. So let's work into some of the gaps. There's some very small spaces left on the right. If I'm seeing that I'm not getting the right pattern, I'll just continue working, allowing myself to come back to that area rather than stop. Okay, some of those tree trunks might need to be slightly changed, but the gaps here. Okay. Any more gaps on this side? Again, I'm squinting my eyes now so I can see the full picture much more clearer. It allows me to pick up some of those spaces, seeing much more clearer silhouettes of the branches. Right, so I'm going to introduce a tiny bit more white. With lovely fluffy clouds continue to develop. I might leave the final accents of light, of the white, till the last moment, when the branches are done and I can touch things up, because I don't want that conflict of tones appearing too earlier on. But some of the accents of light are becoming more stronger now. Maybe a tiny bit more somewhere here. I think it's already there, but it's not quite drying. And perhaps that's why not showing yet. Just a gentle light through. Okay. Find those silhouettes. I think this tree could go much lower. And then I can come back to the actual true silhouettes of these trees. I'll just find the rough locations close to the clouds. Okay. So my next step will be some of the lighter grasses at the back and some of the trees at the back. I'm going to use the filbert brush. It's a medium-sized brush. I'm going to go for my first green, using emerald green and ochre. I'm interested to mix the color for the trees at the back first. So they're slightly darker and grayish in tone. So I'm going to place a couple of strokes just to see if I'm on the right track. Let's add a tiny bit more violet. I can just test my colors here and also have a good collection of greens. Okay. Part of the sky is still slightly wet here, so I'm just going to gently dab my strokes. And this tree will have slightly darker color, but some of it will have that similar color. So if I'll go for slightly darker tone, perhaps a little bit more into the emerald green. If I need to get back to some of the whites, no, I'm not very happy with this tree. So I can use a sponge. I just soaked it in water. I can just wipe my green off. And the previous layers are there because they have dried. And I can give it another go. It's reflects here because it's just very wet. So let's pick up the color. Let's make it tiny little bit lighter. Just want to have a little bit more gentler strokes here, perhaps even if it's not going to be my final color. Let's make it slightly darker and maybe come back with lighter tones. Okay. And slightly darker down my trees here, and even perhaps keeping them a couple of trees here on the side. Now, don't really want to come back too much to these trees because they need to stay on a distance, and then I'll start overlapping the colors and the shapes, and so it'll be too much to repaint them. Occasionally, it's essential to touch things up, but if it can be done at the earlier stages straight away and left, that might be better. So let's just keep them as they are for now. There are loads of wet segments as well, so it's harder to judge the texture. There's some more. If they're trees or part of the leaves lower this edge, but it just feels something could be edited there in a similar color. I'm going to let them gently settled in before I touch them up. And let's have a look now at the field. I'm going to use some white and cadmium yellow with some emerald green, much more stronger, bold in color. Pigment, quite sunny. So let's a little too strong. Slightly settled. Can always put some highlights on that color. Feels a little too light as an earliest color. Let's try this one. And let's just find some of those spaces and gaps. Chop a little bit into the surface of the grasses. It's not much this side. Also, the spaces might tell us the type of plants or gaps created by the plants overlapping. With a few branches again here going over, but for now, just gently change the color as it's going towards the right hand side. And tiny bit of similar ochre as I'll start developing the work. The color variation will be changing. I can see a little bit of similarity of color present on the foreground, so I might put a couple of shapes out, even if they will be lost afterwards. At least I'm planning some of the color to come through, or even if that's might be not quite the right color, at least those decisions were tested earlier on. You can see some of that color, maybe darker version of it. Perhaps for some of the younger branches above, might need a tiny little bit of red to make that green a little bit more orangey. Okay, just a bit of a connection with our grasses. That conversation of color started to too many parallel lines. Lovely elongated leaves. Okay. So this is my other darker version of this orangey browny green. Perhaps that's some of it's gonna start to create and the growth. I want to touch it up, paint it a little while the field is still wet, so then I don't have too many sharp strokes, but perhaps more smudged strokes and suggestive ones. Okay. Now let's have a look at some of the darker tones at the back. I'm going to use some ochre and violet to create a little bit of dark brown color, which I'll need for the post, for the fence post. I have made it smaller, but once I was painting the sky, so I need to expand on its size a little. And then I'll work into its highlights with a different darkness, but I also want to see this color with a little bit of emerald green, sorry, ultramarine, as some of the shadows next to the post. Perhaps not all of them going to be brown, but they will have a good darkness to them. I'm also interested into the pattern of the darkness, but also there might be some of that depth shown because of that color used. Oh, I can also make a more greener version of that color by using more emerald green, extra emerald green and extra ultramarine. So the gaps I have left between some of my strokes might give me an opportunity to have starting points. Where do I put those shadows? Or at least I start with them. Edge is getting quite a dark green. I want to be able to see that green. So using small amount of white will give me that shadow green. I think still more emerald green than ochre. I'm gonna go slightly higher for that area. I think I need more ultramarine to make the gaps between the trees, branches slightly darker. Might preserve some of the initial ultramarine, runny paint of emerald green and blue. All is about now that mark making, that contrast of pigments. It's not the final volumes of it. There will be lighter branches coming in, and that will be amended. But it's that initial evaluations. That's why I prefer using some larger brushes earlier on. And my flowers are going to be here, so I need to have something darker in preparation for this area. So I'm increasing my darks. Using a little bit of brown, a little bit of bluey green, perhaps more brown in this area where I might see a bit of extra soil, or some lighter plants which has dab of brown, and then maybe some drier plants in the shadow. There is another branch, perhaps perhaps a couple, which will create again some more depths. They start to look a little bit gloomy, a little bit more dull in color, but it's getting ready for that preparation. And I want to have a small amount of, maybe a little bit lighter version of this color for the tree. Again, that's a little bit too light. Better. More volumes at a time, finding that silhouette of the green, adapting to the white gaps where we can see the sky if they were a little bit too big earlier on. Smaller, but the gaps of blue become much more natural in their shapes. Okay. Now let's continue working with some medium tones of grasses. I'm gonna go for some extra yellow and ochre with my emerald green, maybe a dab of red again. Slightly lighten tone by using a tiny bit more white. Bring a little bit more. All actually colors here. Just work a little bit, simplifying more of the shapes. Then to move from one color to another quite quickly, as kind of the need for that variety, and you constantly constantly want to compare shapes. So don't really want to limit myself to one color at a time, or how much certain color could be used. Need to be staying fluent. Especially when painting that range of greens or similar color, similar complex range of family colors. Okay. Maybe back to some warmer green. For tree branches and bushes, I want to use my filbert brush for some softer, more round-edged strokes. Just adding a little bit of extra warmth. Of trying to make a variety of patterns. Don't want to have light, dark, medium, light green, and then I repeat and I repeat and I repeat. So checking that consistency. So there are lots to consider through the whole painting. And the only way to know if that's the right way is to keep on painting, making errors, learning from them. And then obviously the more you paint, you know what will work or what will not. Not sure about that one either. Working into some highlights of them, of the grasses. Which fold very delicately and create all these beautiful ranges of light right in front of us. They're quite delicate, and that's whole painting is really based on those sub nuances of light. Some highlights on them. Opened up leaves. It's quite a big block of light here. It's getting a bit more exciting. It's quite a lot of strokes of different kind. To represent different vegetation and different type of plants. I think I'm ready to come close to some of them. Shapes of the grasses close to the background field. I want to show a little bit of light behind them, but I don't want to show that they still need to be more appearing as silhouettes. So that mingle of the lighter, darker tones. I'm going to continue. I'm going to pick up a small flat brush now. Take some extra paint. That's a little bit more delicate tone, easier to work with. Some finer shapes. Now I might need to start working into my flowers now, at least placing them in approximate positions as they will have a lot of focus within that design. So I might start with a little bit of green, violet, grayish tone, which will be light against the background, but we'll start on darker side of the flowers. Really love them car parsleys. They're very fascinating and quite difficult to paint flowers. It's quite a wet area here, so I might leap forward and leave this area to dry. Otherwise, all it does is just smudges. I'll come back to that. maybe some of the flowers. So sometimes I start from stems, sometimes I start with flowers, just of identifying the area they will develop. I've taken over the space. And a little bit more light, otherwise they're getting lost in the similar greens. Topping up more white within my color, so I can start working into subtones. So eventually I'll only use a very small amount of pure white for the final touch up of the flowers, but most of them will have that subcolor, subtone. I tend to use the corner of my, if I'm using a flat brush, so then my shapes have a little bit more individual flowers within each umbrella. But also don't give me squarish strokes, which the flat brush is really good with. But the flat brush is amazing for straight lines, when to do connections. For the flowers, you want to do stems, you want to do some highlights on the grasses. I just top up some of these flowers in white. Oh, and off-white. And so far they're a little bit too similar, so let's vary them. Some of this sub-light tone gonna be on the border and top border, some will be on the bottom. Okay, this area is still wet. Some little umbrellas have almost a flat edge to them. Some have a little bit more round. Depends where the flowers are in the environment. If they're on the sunshine, they fully open up and they become more round. If they more in a shadow, they a little bit more closing down. Or if it's in the morning, early morning or later evening, they are starting to close down a bit more. So they will start being flatter. Also different types of cow parsley. Some are more delicate and some are a little bit more solid and strong, so they never go in fully lovely umbrella shapes. They stay in quite flattish at the top. So for more of a round edge, I'm going to use my filbert brush. Excuse me. So I'm just topping up a little bit more of the paler colors. I try not to paint each individual flower as it is in a photograph. I try to have to pick up an idea and then decide how I want to turn the flowers in within the shape. And have an impression of a plant rather than identical or very close copy. Lots of suggestiveness here as well. Lots of observation on your walks, as well as collection of sketches and photographs. Turning the brush around and creating slightly different size strokes naturally gives you that space and proportion of the flowers. If you want them to look towards you, kind of to see the top of them, you just try to create some more wider strokes and more narrower strokes for the sides. Want to see more light on the other side, so we're rotating the flower. Okay, they're a little bit similar at the moment, but perhaps when I add more grasses, that variety could be changed. Okay, but I'm quite happy with that. Nice and delicate flowers. A few lost and found shapes as well, coming from different flowers. Maybe have a connection with some of the reflections. The connection with some of them. Light on the field. A little bit too strong in that light, but I think if I tone down some of the grasses there, grasses silhouettes, it might be quite a good combination, maybe a bit too strong. Don't like that. It's too patchy and just too much similarity of strokes. I think that field color will look better. Toning that green down. Let it dry. See the effect of that color. Feels a little bit more neutral alternative. Maybe I need to work onto my grasses silhouettes when the field is dry. Last time I worked into it when it was a bit wet. I thought that will blend better, but That's a better glow of the field. Find some connections in the leaves. Quite a busy area, which I think needs some calmer cooling down. That's quite a nice corner now with the light coming through and perhaps a little shine on the outer layers of the leaves. I've not quite finished my pen spool, so let's work into that. Oak and violet together with some extra white. Contrast. Let's have a bit more settled one. And a bit more dark, and also perhaps something what got some leaves overlap in it. So maybe that contents of the color of leaves will be more appropriate than just overlapping it. I'm just making it lighter and darker. And when the grasses are dry here, I can, sorry, the field is dry there, I can top up some darker silhouettes. That's a better height. Again, I'm going a little bit too fast. The paint has not dried yet in that area. Time to come back to some of the darker tones again and find some more exciting shadows. Again, some try and error with the patterns. It's overlapping certain gaps and coming back and overlapping those shapes with the lighter tones, medium tones, building it up with loads of patience. And just constantly looking for subtones, sub changes, not big jumps of light and dark, just very subtle. A small turn of a gentle angle of that shape. Quite a lot of wide spaces here, so maybe there will be something breaking it down. Because we want to show the variety. We also want to see the uniqueness. It didn't quite work out. Let's give it another go. And some more deeper shadows. Using some ultramarine and violet together. Always bordering with darker greens and just solid shadows. They're constantly changing the color on your brush. Quite like some of the patterns here, but the color is too similar. So if I'll continue with the pattern and vary the darkness. Okay, this is a stem and this is a grass. Okay, this side now is becoming more exciting. This one's a little bit flat. Some of these grasses need to disappear before they reappear. Maybe that shape didn't quite, although I did like the forms here, but maybe they just come out a little too similar. I'm gonna let it dry here. Maybe a tiny bit more darker tones and then come back to the lighter tones. Yeah, this area is still a little wet. Okay, the intention was really good. The outcome is not clear because it's not just reflecting, but also it's just too complex shape. A simple shape of light here is again better.
Mhm.
Right, tiny bit more darker shadows. Well, darker shadows. an edge here. I love some of the paler blues from initial sketch, so maybe I use that as an alternative to some of my shadows that link. And connection. Now the light is changing in my studio. It's affecting my painting and also my perception of it, as the sun is gently setting outside. So I might touch up a tiny bit more on a couple of my grasses, and I might stop for today, allowing me some thinking time and not overworking. So I'll put a little bit of light up, playful. And I might stop here for now. So there's quite a bit of work still to do, but it's really lively. I'm happy that there's a big range of leaves, some larger ones, some darker ones, some tiny more detailed ones, different kind of types of plants. There is a big mingle of plants and grasses at the front. They still need to be followed through, and perhaps from a little bit more broken background, find a little bit more settled shapes. So very exciting piece to continue to work with, but complex in explaining what's happening. It's more of a flow and continuous comparison of different areas of the paintings. So I hope you have enjoyed being with me today. I hope you get inspired, and we'll go outside and look for the greens, perhaps some cow parsleys, and find your range of greens and your range of texture when you paint in the greens in the field. So thank you very much for today, and I look forward to seeing you in my future classes. Bye-bye.